Hello there, Dylan Burns. How the devil are you, sir?
I'm doing okay. I'm still kicking. I'm still alive. I'm still working, and I'm still happy. So, you know, I can't complain too much.
Awesome stuff. Tell us about Ukraine. What the hell is going on, sir?
What's going on in Ukraine right now?
Yes.
Okay, well, what's going on in Ukraine? Well, there's a few things. On one hand, the Ukrainians are somewhat bullish right now. Because the Ukrainians very much, but by the way, 1 second. I could just say, you're Kevin Logan, by the way, for everybody in my chat. This isn't just some, like, you know, some Bonger I've let stumble into, you know, my room to just, like, harass me. This is an old, hippy-dippy old head, for those of you who forget how nonchalant, like, he looked at conservatives and told them to fuck off on my show for years. For anybody
Literally, that was my entire bit, was going on and saying, you know, shut the fuck up, Rob. You're a piece of shit. Yeah.
Because he was the what do we call that? The fuck off left, I guess I would call it. I don't know. You need to think of it, your sect, and you need to come up with like a branded name.
Exactly. I'm not the tolerant left. I'm the go fuck yourself left. Yes.
The fuck off left. Go fuck yourself left. Well, we'll have to figure it out, Kevin. But I appreciate you know, you taking some time to talk to me. As for what's going on in Ukraine right now, they're bullish because the Ukrainians are bombing the Russians quite a bit now. Every other day, Russia is getting bombed by long-range attack drones, which are targeting their oil refineries, which are targeting their, you know, weapons manufacturing, which are targeting electronics factories, which support the war. And so Ukrainians are watching on social media as Russians repost video going like, "Bliat!" as, like, you know, a drone like flies over their apartment. And to them, that's been their experience for like going on 5 years. And some people, I guess, get the feeling that, you know, it's almost nature, like the war is returning to where it was launched from, and that is how naturally it will end. And so I think that has created some bullishness. There's, of course, still extreme problems when it comes to, you know, how the Tetsika behaves, you know, the military recruitment and the police, and that is still a social pressure. There's still, of course, the ever-present issue with corruption, but Zelensky's right hand is currently being prosecuted for corruption charges by the independent NAPU and SAPU. So that's good news. That's been around recently since Ukrainian anti-corruption activists defended those organizations. Ukraine has developed long-range missile tech that has allowed them also to carry heavier payloads into countries to do, you know, into Russia to do heavier damage to, you know, missile factories, drone factories, and the like. And the Russian advance on the front line has slowed down to a crawl. Now, they're still advancing. I've been doing a documentary on Konstantinivka for some time, and they're still making advancements there. But they're not advancing nearly as fast as they were last year, which wasn't particularly fast to begin with, or the year before that. So currently they have slowed down the rate of their advance, but their casualties are still as high, if not higher, according to recent estimates. So that means that they're taking more casualties for less land, which is a negative trend for the Russians, as well as a bunch of negative economic data for what the Russians have to look forward to. Of course, the energy bump that Russia got from the start of the war in Iran was a negative for the Ukrainians, but we've also seen energy lower somewhat since then. Then again, sanctions exceptions for the Russians have continued, so they're still making like hundreds of millions of dollars off of that. And they keep saying that this is a time exempt thing, like eventually, you know, it'll lock off. But if you keep extending, it's not time exempt because it's just forever.
Yeah, literally. Yeah. Okay, well, that's, I mean, I suppose some positive news, but it just drags on and on and on, doesn't it? It's been, what, 4 fucking years now?
It's been going on 5 years, but yeah, it's been 4 years, going on 5. It's now longer than World War I.
Yeah, which is just fucking, and it's turned into trench warfare in places as well. So it's unfortunate comparisons as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think some of the comparisons are shallow. There are trenches, but like the style of trenches are different. The you know, how many men are in the trenches are different. The style of the attacks, the infiltration attacks that are a lot more constant here, are different than the general just like mass wave attacks that was more common at the start of the war. But I think like the dragging on nature, the like very small amounts of territory gained, those probably have a lot closer similarities. Then again, the Russian advance at times has been slower than World War I advances when it comes to territory gain. So, it might be actually you have to compare World War I to the war in Ukraine when it comes to the speed of advance, if this keeps going at the rate it is.
Is there any hope in sight for an end to this? Like, because again, you get bits and bobs of news from Ukraine, but it's only so much focus you can have over 5 years, I suppose. Is there any hope that this will actually end? Are the negotiations happening, or is it just going to go on and on?
Well, I mean, there's been like the Trump negotiations that have been happening, but as far as I know, because of the war in Iran, they have essentially put that on hold. And I remember Marco Rubio, as of like 2-3 weeks ago, he was saying that basically negotiations are on hold. And so he went from 24 hours to please hold elevator music, right? So it's been quite a transition in the way that the administration has talked about it. And I think that the administration so far has lacked the tools necessary to push the Russians to the negotiating table. Of course, there's a bunch of ways people like hypothesize as how you can get the Russians to, bring about peace. Since they are the ones that started the war, ultimately they would have to be the ones that end the war. But the problem is that, all the tools that have been offered, which is, hey, let's offer them economic investment. Hey, let's give them some sanctions exemptions. Hey, let's roll out the red carpet in Alaska and have Marines like welcome Putin. Hey, let's say to the Russians that they can hold on to every single thing that they have taken. All the stolen grain, all of the territory, there's not going to be any, like, we're no longer going to vote with like human rights investigations. We're not going to work with the bodies that would conduct those investigations into like child kidnapping, executions, hunting of civilians, the human safari. So in my view, that's quite a good deal when you're looking down that from the Russian perspective, considering how much they've done. The Russians don't accept that deal. They want the rest of the Donbass. They want Kramatorsk. They want Sloviansk. They want to displace, roughly speaking, like another 100,000 to 150,000 people, and push and take the rest of the Donbass. Now, that's what they're saying immediately for what they want to do. According to the Russian constitution, they would also want to take back Kherson, where the human safari is ongoing, which, as of this point, more humans have been hunted by Russian drone pilots in Kherson, more civilians, than like the snipers of Sarajevo. So we're talking about, and that's just Kherson, to be clear.
A Kurd is
so
a Kurd.
it's quite jury.
Podink 975 has donated $25. By the way, PA is infinitely better than Maryland.
Okay, Podunk, thank you for the $25, but fuck you. Okay, Pennsylvania is not better than Maryland. Okay, you're near us. So you've got some like decent seafood, you've got some like decent sandwiches, but at the end of the day, you're not Maryland, you're not the old line state. You are still Pennsylvania and John Fetterman, and that's the end of the discussion. So
all I'll say is it's so cute to see Americans talk about, oh, you're not as good as this place or that, but you're all rustic colonial filth. Okay, just bear that in mind.
I mean, like, cool. I mean, I look personally, okay, I think that the most interesting things come from colonialism, whether it be debate topics for Hippy Dippy or whether it be yelling matches on Piers Morgan. So I think that, and hey, Piers Morgan, British. So I would just like to throw out that Piers Morgan is British.
Yeah,
so
no,
no matter what you say, there's not really much you can say after that.
I can't argue that point. That is checkmate. Yeah.
So I wanted to talk to you about a few things. I'm happy to talk about whatever you want to talk about, but there's a few things I wanted to get your thoughts on.
Go on then.
Because I am an American, and I following the war in this country, and this is disconnected me from a few things. Number one, it's disconnected me from some of the politics that goes back back in the States because I'm separated. It also separates me from other countries' politics because I'm so focused in on this. It also separates me from the space. And so I wanted to touch on three things. The first thing is the United Kingdom has been Ukraine's most ardent supporters. It's one of the things that I think the British can honestly be proud of, that when it comes to polling, when it comes to voting intention, when it comes to like those who have actually held elected office, like consistently, the British have been pumping out good performances for the Ukrainians, at least when it comes to them not voting open Putinists into power. I do want to ask, is that changing? Because I know Reform has changed their tune on Vladimir Putin, but changing your tune and doing something different is also vastly two different things. And the other thing is Restore Britain. I don't know if they're going to make any actual inroads, hold actual seats, but they have a lot more Putinist friendly policy. And a lot of the Putin freaks, you know, I don't know what else to call them, that were in British politics before and that felt like exiled from Reform UK because they tried to be somewhat normal, or at least appear somewhat normal in order to win votes, they seemingly have gone over to Restore. So what do you think is the state of the Putinist? We'll just start with the Putinist right in the country.
It is an interesting one because, as you say, when polled, the British people and even people who vote for parties like Restore or Reform, generally speaking, are supportive of the Ukrainian cause. Right? That's why there isn't a push like there is in, say, parts of the American body politic for defunding Ukraine or for removing some of the support for Ukraine. That isn't really on the agenda here in the UK, but all of the political parties in Parliament really are pretty ironclad in that we should support Ukraine to the fullest possible extent. And that's fine. That's not a remotely controversial opinion. There is obviously, like you say, a growing potential difference because whilst at the moment they have, I think, 6 members of Parliament, the Reform Party under Nigel Farage have a problematic history. Nigel Farage has made he's basically, if you imagine him as Donald Trump's cumsock, that's about where we're at in terms of his politics, and so the kind of love of the strong man, the love of people like Putin and Orban and these sorts of fucking garbage bags is absolutely a part of what his politics are. But like you say, he's had to moderate that in order to try and gain mainstream support. And it's worked to some extent because they are currently leading in the polls and are, if a general election was to happen today, would undoubtedly have the largest number of seats, although they probably fall short of a majority. And I don't think any of the other parties would work with them. So Nigel Farage's path to becoming Prime Minister...
look a little bit like the AfD in Germany, where they might become the biggest party, but nobody else will want to work with them.
Yeah, basically, yeah. There would undoubtedly be a cordon sanitaire, as they have in France and things like that. Yeah, I think that it's his path to becoming Prime Minister is certainly there because the electorate is so split in a way that there never used to be. It used to be 2-party politics, Conservative and Labour. And now there are various seats across the country where it's like 4- and 5-party races. And so they can win in places that they shouldn't be able to win with like 22% of the vote or something ridiculous because it's so split across various different parties. And so potentially he could become Prime Minister, but at the moment it's unlikely, but possible is the way I would go with that.
Do you think Nigel Farage has gone through any transformation? And not to ask if he's now he's like woke or something, but to say that, do you think that the Russian invasion of Ukraine and its outgrowths and how the British public have reacted, how British civil society has reacted, has it all shifted him? So if that they did make these gains, we wouldn't expect Putinist talking points from their party? Or do you think the lack of filtration for their candidates that they nominate, plus a lack of genuine interest from Nigel Farage, who is more just reacting to how the wind blows, means that it is a slumbering issue?
I don't think he's transformed in the slightest. I think he's lying. He's hiding his power level. Now, I don't necessarily think if he were to come to power that he would instantly just, go over to the sort of Putinist side of things. But there's definitely an element within his party that would be pushing him in that direction. Lest we forget, of course, the former leader of the Reform Party in Wales is literally now in prison for having taken money from the Kremlin. He was literally like a paid-up Russian asset. He was and this was a guy who was, absolutely at the core of their national sort of project. And people like the leader of the Restore Party, was also a former member of the. He was literally elected as a member of Nigel Farage's Reform Party. Reform and Restore are two different parties. They're very easy to mix up. But anyway, he's a former Reform member of Parliament and the current now, of course, leader of that the political party. And this is the point where it becomes quite dangerous, because essentially you have a dueling extremist pull. Right, in that the Reform Party is itself trying to drag itself away from its more extreme element in order to become more electable, but the Restore Party, which is essentially being backed and funded by Elon Musk. There's no doubt about that. I don't know exactly what kind of chicanery that's being pulled there, but millions of dollars is going into the pockets of Restore. I mean,
that is something I wanted to ask about, because Elon used to be I believe at the time it might have been UKIP. I don't know, but it might at that point it was, I don't know, but he was with Nigel Farage. He was with his party.
Yes.
And then he turned against them, and then he went for Restore Britain. Why would Nigel Farage not be? As far as I know, it's because he wasn't right wing enough. He wasn't strong enough on the issue of immigration. Was strong enough on certain issue. What was it that pushed Elon to go to the furthest part of the right wing political spectrum for a party that might actually get a seat, or is in the batting range to get one?
Essentially, it's not that Reform changed necessarily, although they have, like I say, moderated in certain areas. But it's because Elon Musk himself radicalized his own algorithm on X, and his obsession with spending all of his time on that and getting all of his news from that has essentially pushed him further and further right. His own echo chamber is just right-wing nonsense now, and so you can tell that by the way in which he goes about saying absurd statistics like this grooming gangs thing in the UK, where he claims that 250,000 girls were raped by Pakistani grooming gangs. Absolute nonsense. That statistic is absolute bullshit, but he can just put it out there because he's a trillionaire. People listen. And so he's essentially radicalized himself to the point where Nigel Farage, who has the most draconian immigration policy that any major political figure has ever had in this country, outside of, if you go back 200 years or something ridiculous, isn't far enough for him now. And so he's now gone to the Restore Party, which wouldn't have any electability or chance whatsoever if it weren't for Elon Musk's support, both in terms of pushing out that message, because the Restore leader is a crazy bastard on the extremes of British politics and has no real support in the country whatsoever. He's not a liked person, but has been given a massive platform beyond which he would never usually have had, and is now getting huge amounts of money to fund his campaign, which gives him viability. Now, he's not going to become Prime Minister, he's not going to become a major political leader, but what he can do is gain enough seats and enough support that it pushes Nigel Farage to have to take on a threat from his right wing.
You know, when I look at what Elon talks about, he's not talking about I'm really worried about, that the healthcare system works, or, I'm going to make sure that the buses in Great Britain run on time. It's always immigration. It's always the topic of immigration and backlash over the amount of immigrants in the United Kingdom. And recently I saw he was bringing a lot of attention to the stabbing incident of Henry Novak, where the guy got murdered, stabbed by a Sikh man. The police responded, we'll say, very negatively, by kind of dragging the guy to the side as he just kind of bled out, didn't really attempt to do anything to really treat his wounds. And it's created a massive immigrant backlash directed at immigrant communities. And I've seen that has been a focus of his attention too. But what's interesting to me is in these cases, when they break them down, would the policies that they're even recommending to fix these cases, number one? And number two, would the cases that wouldn't be, what's the policy then? Is the policy just to deport everyone? Is the policy to deport everybody within the last 5 years? Is the policy that we just shut it off to tap now? And I think really when I listen to Elon, the answer just seems to be whatever is the furthest option, whatever is the furthest available opportunity. Now, well, I don't know what vibe you have gotten from it.
Yeah, no, that's exactly the case. Basically he's whatever is the most right-wing possible option is the one he wants to go with, and so if he could deport all of them, I'm sure he would want to do that. Ironically, given that he is both an immigrant to the country he currently lives in and very possibly an illegal immigrant. Look at the interview he gave about him and his brother's, let's say, problematic entry visa issues. For that particular talking point. And of course, even though he has been right-wing as fuck about this issue completely, when he was in government, of course, with the Doge and all the rest of it, he was pushing for more acceptance of H1V 5 visas or whatever the fuck they were called. Basically, he wants lots of cheap immigrant tech labor to run his businesses. So he's absolutely in favor of certain kinds of immigration that financially benefit him. Understandably, I suppose, but even so, he's a massive fucking hypocrite. But yeah, the policy in terms of immigration, as you point out, the murder of Henry Novak is an interesting case. Not just because, of course, it shows that the police aren't very fucking good. Have to get an ACAB talking point in there. But the right wing are so obsessed with pointing out issues that don't really exist. Like the idea that there is somehow a police bias in favor of brown people over white people when the exact opposite is true is a fascinating one. And of course, because of the pushing of this rhetoric by people like Nigel Farage, who literally called for cold white rage, was the exact phrasing he used in the wake of this, and Elon Musk pushing nonsense literally led to race riots. And indeed, what I would describe as a pogrom in Belfast, in Northern Ireland.
I saw some of the footage of it where homes were burnt, vehicles were burnt, families had to be evacuated from armored vehicles, and also the online reaction to those families having to be evacuated, to those families being terrorized, seemed to be encouraging of the violence. Like the vast majority of the that's not to say the vast majority of people in Great Britain believe that, but that's to say that those who were inspired enough to leave comments, inspired enough to did enjoy that. And I do also wonder how much other state actors would be interested in fanning these types of flames, because this type of internal strife is exactly what was the business of the Internet Research Agency, which was Russia's premier operation to try to create societal discontent in the United States along the lines of race.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt that the kind of Russian PSYOP operation, which is why, of course, Russia Today, the quote-unquote news agency, was banned in the UK, which, by the way, on that same basis, I would actually ban X as a foreign operating propaganda outlet at this point, which has literally caused demonstrable violence in the UK. I think it should be banned as well. But either way, yeah, there's no doubt that the Russian psychological operation of trying to destabilize countries is exactly the kind of thing they wanted. They wanted Brexit, they wanted Donald Trump, they wanted discontent. They want these other countries to be split on any grounds they absolutely can possibly do. And this is exactly the kind of thing that the Russian, we know that's why they've, had people like the former Wales reform leader on their payroll. We know that's why they funded political parties and political pressure groups in the UK. I wouldn't be surprised if people like Tommy Robinson, who literally, by the way, just got back from Moscow, where he met Elon Musk's dad. They talked to one another in Moscow. And he was arrested and, I say arrested, he was briefly detained at the airport and questioned about his activities there, because, of course, some of this might actually fall under terrorist legislation. But we'll wait and see.
Tommy Robinson's an interesting fellow. He was in the United States for a very short period recently. And while there, he, went up to, pro-Ukraine demonstrators. And, I know the people who were, he was interviewing. And he's just, trying to randomly harass people in another country, trying to mock them for being supportive of Ukraine. And he's, again, in a country that is actively abandoning the Ukrainians. It's people like him specifically that would benefit the most from Restore Britain growing, because it would allow a politically viable Putinist right-wing party, when right now, Nigel Farage is too spooked by it to allow anything like that around him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the thing, because it's so uncontroversial amongst the British population, the support of Ukraine, that Nigel Farage can't really push that. Even though I'm sure in his heart of hearts that's the thing he believes. He is a Putinist. He is a strongman, authoritarian, fucking colonialist piece of garbage. But Restore are just balls to the wall crazy with it. And like you say, this does lead to that possibility for people like Tommy Robinson. Also, an interesting one that he was allowed into the United States, given that the first time he was arrested and imprisoned was because he illegally entered the United States using somebody else's passport. So he's literally illegally entered the United States previously, and yet they've allowed him back in. Whereas Haitian football fans, that's too much. We can't allow those people in, obviously.
I don't know, President Trump. We need to do something about these repeat offenders.
Well, literally, if you've got previous for illegally entering a country, you would think they would, be wary of allowing you in. Whereas, like I say, soccer fans from certain countries can't get in there no matter what. Ridiculous stuff.
Let me read a comment. Somebody donated $5 from Black-Pilled Kiwi. Brexit backfired on this crowd. Immigration from further afield from Europe replaced the EU poll. Thoughts?
Yeah, literally, that is exactly the case. And I warned racists. Let's be honest, not everyone who voted Brexit is racist, but I did warn people who were racist at the time.
Kevin. I disavow.
Fair enough. See, he's even doing the hippy-dippy neutral thing, but he doesn't need to. Outrageous.
My blood.
I warned them at the time. What would happen is that the white migration that happens from Europe, so like literally the thing that was complained about for ages was called the quote-unquote Polish plumber, which is the idea of like a kind of white Eastern European person coming in and taking jobs.
Because then I see now Britbonger accounts being like, oh, based Poland, incredible Poland, the most based Poland, based Poland. And I'm just like, what? Like, I remember being like 16 years old, 17 years. I was young when Brexit was going on, and reading like these, like the most bigoted comments I could imagine about Polish people, and then seeing, like, generally speaking, the same accounts as being like, oh, like fantastic. Maybe they like them from a distance. Maybe that's it.
Well, yeah, exactly. They don't really want them here because they don't like foreign people, generally speaking. But this was the kind of scare tactic that was used, right? The idea of an Eastern European coming and taking your job. But the thing is, when you just walk past like a Polish person in the street, they're just some white person. They could be from anywhere, right? And I warned them that what would happen is after Brexit, Britain would be so desperate for trade deals around the world that they would be giving out visas to people, right? And I said literally, before Brexit happened, the Indian government, Narendra Modi's a fascist piece of shit, but that's a different matter, literally said that in order for a free trade agreement, they would want massive increases in the number of student visas, which means lots and lots more brown people from the Indian subcontinent coming to Britain. Now, I've got no problem with that, but I said to racists, if you vote for Brexit, this is what is going to happen. The British government is going to be so desperate for these trade deals that they're going to be giving out fucking visas to everyone, right? You're going to have less white migration from Europe and more brown migration from other places in the world. They're not going to stop migration. That's not going to happen. We are a country that demographically needs younger people coming into the country because white people, or people more broadly in Britain, aren't fucking. Or they are fucking, but they're not giving birth, right? There are no new babies being fucking born here. And so we have an aging population, a massively spiraling pensions bill, and a smaller and smaller working age tax base to pay for that. So they're going to have to bring people in from somewhere. If you vote for Brexit, then they're not going to be coming from white places, they're going to be coming from brown places. You don't want that, obviously. Maybe think twice before cutting off your own nose to spite your face type thing. And they didn't listen, and that's exactly what's happened now. So you've got a massive increase in the number of student visas from places like India. We did a free trade agreement with Australia and New Zealand, Australia, where we just basically allowed them to flood our market with lamb for no real advantage whatsoever, because the British government just needed a positive news story about this. And the real problem is, of course, that, as you say, it's backfired on them, but the person that's going to benefit most from that backfiring is the guy that caused it in the first place, Mr. fucking Brexit himself. Because the British establishment are so poor, and this is ultimately where the rise of the far right comes from, is that...
Can I just say, as a foreigner, it's very weird to see all the people who were like huge champions of Brexit. Then Brexit just like crashes and burns. The vast majority of of the people in Great Britain polled now think it was a mistake. Like by, I don't know what polling data you've seen, but it seemed like a ratio to 2/3. The 2/3 of the British public seem to agree. And now the British public have turned in their time of ire against the current administration, against Starmer, is the person who convinced them to get into the current situation as it stands.
Yes, the British people are what I like to call stupid as fuck. Because that's exactly what they are. They were tricked.
I'll excuse it because there's not much room I can speak from here.
Well, they were tricked by a con man. They were tricked by the monorail guy from The Simpsons into voting for the monorail. And then the monorail crashed and killed loads of people. And they've gone to the monorail guy, can you come in and fix the entire country for us, please?
A curd is a curd.
That's literally what the situation we find ourselves in. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Let me know if you think you'd benefit.
And ultimately, this is where the far right rise, is that the traditional parties of Europe, they kind of usually have like a soft right conservative party of some variety and a soft left social democratic or socialist party. And those are the two that kind of go back and forth. And those are the traditional post-war sort of political set. Both of those have completely abandoned their core voters in order to chase an ever-diminishing number of swing voters who don't represent the countries in which they live. And, of course, they're in hock to capital and all the rest of it. Again, traditional leftist talking points, I'm sure. But I think it's true nonetheless. And so they've completely abandoned those things, leaving a political vacuum, which the far right have been more swift at beginning to fill. You started to see more left-wing parties like Jean-Luc Mélenchon in France, the Green Party here in the UK, things like that. But the right have been far more in place to capitalise on that. So you have places like the AfD in Germany and what was the National Front in France? I forget what they're called now. They've changed their fucking name to something else.
It's RM now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And of course, UKIP previously, although they're now, it's technically a different political party, but it's essentially a rebranded political movement, which is reform, because it would be a bit silly to call yourself UKIP now that the supposed independence you seek or sought has been gained. And so, yeah, the Reform Party are essentially that.
It is interesting, though. This kind of shows an interesting experiment I've never thought of. After you vote for the faces, like the leopard eating faces party, what do you do when you need to rebrand?
What do you call yourself? The fixing facial scarring party, and tell people we can fix the problem that the leopards eating your face caused, even though they are a leopard in a doctor's outfit pretending to be a human doctor. That's essentially the situation we find ourselves in. He's trying to fix the problem he caused, or is going to be potentially tasked with that by the British people. And of course, he's not in any way able to do so. And not just that, but one of the core things in foreign policy that people hate in Britain is our being in hock to America constantly. And yet Nigel Farage could not be further up Trump's arse if he tried. It's amazing. The British people are fucking idiots. I'm sorry. I hate to say it, but they genuinely are a very stupid race of people.
I do want to talk about, you talked about Mélenchon, you talked about the Green Party. I do want to talk about that in a second. But since you mentioned it, why is Keir Starmer so not liked? I mean, obviously I'm an outsider, so I can't know everything. But I know that a lot of British people think he is too kind to Trump, that he was too, reconciliatory towards the wars of the Middle East and the trade wars as engaging with the United Kingdom and all of Europe. So it's not like just isolated with them. So I know that's definitely one deciding factor. Are there any other deciding factors?
It's everything about him is dislikable, frankly. He is a fantastically corrupt person. And I say fantastic because literally every single aspect of him is exactly that. He promised basically their strategy at the election was to promise nothing particularly, but just say the word change. We'll do change just generically, but we'll get rid of the Tory corruption and chaos. And yet they have been more corrupt and more chaotic because they didn't have a plan for anything.
More corrupt than the Tories.
Literally, yeah. It could be argued that the Tories were
that's an argument, isn't it?
More successful in their corruption, i.e. they stole more money. That is probably true. But in terms of the fact that corruption is the very core of the Keir Starmer project, up to the point where even before he started really doing anything, he had a guy called Lord Ali, who's a member of the House of Lords, because we have that, because we're a fucking joke, non-entity democracy. He was literally paying for Keir Starmer's wife's dresses and Keir Starmer's glasses and allowing his kid to stay rent-free in one of Ali's houses in order to get access to Downing Street.
Didn't Rishi Sunak have a similar gift scandal of some sort?
Oh yeah, they look. Okay, I'm going to make an unpopular point here, but
Uni party.
no, well, no, that's undoubtedly true. But the use of patronage by political entities in of itself isn't the problem. I think having positions that you can give to your friends who helped you politically is just a part of politics. That's always been the case and it always will. That's unpopular because it seems like corruption. And it kind of is in a vague, like, we should have absolute probity in public office type way. But that's a very childish view of how politics actually works in the real world. Having positions where you can put your friends isn't necessarily the most high profile, but as long as they're vaguely competent at the job, it's fine type thing, has always been the case. That's politics. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. Fine. But what Keir Starmer has done is not that. We saw that most glaringly and obviously with the appointment of Peter Mandelson, a man who was best friends with Jeffrey Epstein, up to the point where he was literally staying in Jeffrey Epstein's New York apartment whilst Jeffrey Epstein was in jail for trafficking and raping a child. So that he appointed that person to be the ambassador to the United States, which, like, to explain the sensitivity of that particular position, you have to imagine that Britain isn't really a sovereign entity. What Britain is an outpost of the American empire. So the British Prime Minister is not really the head of government of a sovereign nation. He's a branch manager. He's a regional branch manager of the American empire's franchise outlet called the United Kingdom. So our liaison with Washington is the person who essentially is able to try and get central office in Washington, D.C. to give better direction to the regional manager. And so he put a best friend of a fucking paedophile into that position, lied about it, and then lied about lying about it, and it's blown up in his fucking face. And now, everyone hates him.
I will say that obviously I think that being friends with child rapists is bad. Gonna take that brave stance today.
Brave and noble.
You can donate at DylanBurns.tv/donate if you want to, like, reward me for my strong moral virtues. But I will say, appointing an Epstein diddler as somebody to manage the relationship with the Trump administration, I don't know. That might have been like 70 chess.
Well, this is the thing, right? The thing, the kind of unspoken part of that story from the Westminster bubble is that I don't think he was put into that position despite those connections. I think he was put into that position because of those connections.
You really think
I genuinely do. I think this is exactly the thing. Obviously, he owed Peter Mandelson a certain political debt because Peter Mandelson was involved in getting rid of Jeremy Corbyn, and indeed for vetting the potential parliamentary candidates at the general election and stuff. Like, he's been involved in the Keir Starmer political project, having previously been that kind of dark force behind the Blair government back in the day as well. So he owed him some position, and if he'd made him the ambassador to Tanzania, no one would have really fucking cared, because no offense to Tanzania, but, like, I can't name you who the actual ambassador is to that country, because obviously. So he was understandable that, you know, he owed him something in that particular regard. But I think specifically they knew that Trump, being obviously a best friend of Epstein as well, moved in the same circles, had the same kind of mentality of deal making and obsession with money and power and all the rest of it that we know Trump has. And of course, someone who could bond over their shared experiences of being in those circles. And so I think it was because he was friends of Jeffrey Epstein that he was sent to Washington. They thought they were too clever for their own good, in thinking, well, this won't blow up in the media ever. This is absolutely fine. And of course, even beyond that, it was then discovered that the reason he failed his security vetting wasn't because of his connections to Jeffrey Epstein and the potential compromat that other countries would have on him, which you would think would be the reason, but it's because he had connections in business to an organization that was very, very closely linked to the Chinese government. And of course, he was on the board of a company in Russia that had very, very close links to the Kremlin after the invasion of eastern Ukraine. And they made him an ambassador to the United States.
You know, these are all these people could question the morality of all these decisions. But again, when trying to communicate with the Trump administration, I mean, like, there might be something to it. There might be something to it, not in the morality of it, but in like the function of what they were trying to do. Like, if I'm gonna go, if I'm sending an ambassador to Al Capone, I'm not gonna send like, I don't know, like Mary Poppins. I'm gonna send I'm gonna be like, you know what? I am gonna send my union contact that's mobbed up.
Well, true, but the thing is, we already had an ambassador who was working perfectly fine with the Trump administration that Trump had openly spoken warmly of. So we didn't even need to make the change. It wasn't like the position was open and they had to fill it with somebody, or that the ambassadorship was going badly. They decided to completely overhaul the entire system and just go, now we're placing our friend in this really cushy position in Washington. And it blew up in their face. And the thing is, they lied about it constantly as well. And this is the point with Keir Starmer. You know, when they do now these word cloud polling, so they will ask people, what words do you associate with a political leader? And then the larger they appear on the screen statistically means that more people said it. Yeah. The biggest word in the word cloud for Keir Starmer is always liar. It's like the biggest one, because he lies about fucking everything. So not only did he lie about the appointment of Peter Mandelson and why it was happening, he then lied about being told about the vetting. He lied literally when he actually eventually had to sack Peter Mandelson. He lied 2 days prior to that when he said he had no information about the further relationship between him and Jeffrey Epstein, even though it was later found, because it was forced out of the government by legislation. Even their own MPs voted against the government to force them to reveal this. It was revealed that literally on his in his documents on his fucking desk that day in Downing Street was a report telling him exactly the thing he then claimed in Parliament he had no knowledge of. So he just lies about everything, and people, like, if there's one thing people don't like, it's being like blatantly lied to, like being taken for a ride, being taken for a fool. And that is what he's tried to do consistently, which is why he's, according to polling, the most unpopular British Prime Minister in history.
Podong, thank you so much for the $5. There's 3 more topics I want to get through tonight before I send you on your way so you can go to the land of sheep and sleepy time. Andy Burnham, do you think that he is somebody who could actually correct course for the Labour Party? Because there's a lot of, at least from the outside, you know, people think if something's going wrong in the party, change the head of the ship. It's not always that simple. Do you think replacing Keir Starmer with Andy Burnham, which, for those of you who don't know, would be one of the most likely candidates for this if he holds his seat, and because he's currently in a race right now for his seat where a reform candidate might actually knock him out of it. But if he holds on to it, do you think him replacing Keir Starmer would be an improvement? And do you think he's the best option?
Well, just to clarify, he's not holding on to his seat because he's not actually in Parliament. The whole reason that there is a by-election is sort of political shenanigans.
Okay, excuse me, but I'm an American, and I'm speaking about your country, so I think I'm right.
You are absolutely correct. I apologize. Please don't bomb us. We don't have much oil.
Thank you.
Anyway, no, the point was Andy Burnham had previously been in Parliament. He was a minister under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown way back in the day. He then left and became mayor of Manchester and did a very, very good job. He's very, very well liked and popular, to the point where even though the Labour Party's polling nationally is terrible, the fact that he is standing in this seat means that they have a chance of winning, and basically no other politician in the country would do that for Labour. The whole reason that this election is even happening is to allow him to stand to become a member of Parliament again, because in order to be the leader of the party, or in order to be Prime Minister, you have to be a member of Parliament. And the whole reason he's standing is to become a member of parliament so that he can then take on Keir Starmer. So literally, the by-election in what's called Makerfield, which is the name of the constituency in the north and west of England, in a town called Wigan, is happening on Thursday. So literally, the leadership election could come as early as the weekend. And he would absolutely piss it because Keir Starmer is very unpopular. But like you say, it's a really interesting
question. If he wins, he's gonna try to become prime minister. That's like guaranteed.
Oh, 100%, yeah. Like, he has to do the humble thing of, like, I'm not getting ahead of myself. I'm just running an election to become a member of parliament. But the whole reason he's doing this, look, because he has a cushy job, right? He has basically an unassailable lead as mayor of Manchester. If he just wants to stay and do that, he could do that for the rest of his fucking life. That wouldn't be a problem. But he doesn't. He's going back to London to become prime minister. That's the entire reason that this is happening. And everyone knows that. It's just, you know, it's the quiet bit that he isn't saying out loud, but everyone else completely understands. He will absolutely challenge Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer has already said that he will take on any challenge, which will undoubtedly happen even if Burnham doesn't win, because literally he's had so many resignations from his cabinet, Keir Starmer, that one of them will absolutely take him on. But they're all waiting for Burnham to win his seat in Makerfield, become a member of parliament, and launch that election so they can all jump in the ring as well. Basically, we're all waiting as a nation for the weekend so that this can happen, one way or the other. Either Burnham wins in Makerfield and launches the leadership bid then, or if he loses and therefore can't run the leadership, it then depends who wants to trigger the election, because there's sort of a tradition in British politics where the person who wields the knife doesn't get to wear the crown. Very rarely does the person who starts that process actually win it, because they're seen as disloyal or whatever, and so someone else always comes through. Whereas on this occasion, Burnham is so much more popular than any other Labour politician that he will win that election if it gets called. But that's predicated on him winning on Thursday, and it's a tight race. The Reform Party have learned from their mistakes in the previous by-election, where instead of having a local person who had roots in the community, they chose a guy called Matt Goodwin, who's a media darling, like a really posh kind of guy who has connections and is sort of well known, but had absolutely no connection to the community whatsoever. He was an outsider, a carpetbagger, if you will, and the people told him to go fuck himself, and the Green Party won it very easily. Whereas on this occasion, they've got a local guy who has roots in the community. He's a plumber. He's just like an ordinary fucking guy, except, of course, he's a bit racist because he's the Reform Party candidate, obviously. And, of course, bizarrely, and get ready for this particular bit, part of this election has been taken up with previous social media posts from this guy, who said openly in public that he wanted to lick the anus of a former British TV host called Carol Vorderman. That was a thing that he said openly in public, and people have questioned as to whether he might be a little bit weird.
You know, we do need some honesty from our political class.
Well, it's perfectly fine.
Maybe not that much honesty, but we do need it.
Yeah, look, it's perfectly fine to want to do that. That's absolutely fine, right? But when you opine on the internet about wanting to do that in a way that politically harasses and the whole reason that this happened was because Carol Vorderman is a well-known British TV host that Americans will never have heard of, and that's fine.
How can you say that when we tell our children to chase their dreams?
Exactly. You know, he had a tongue and a dream. God bless him. But yeah, no, she was a very prominent anti-Brexit campaigner, right? She's a well-known sort of political person, I suppose. And so the right wing was sort of attacking her, and this guy said this thing. And so he's revealed himself to be quite sexist. He's also made really weird comments about abortion. Like, in America, abortion is a thing that gets talked about a lot by the right wing because they don't like it. Whereas in Britain, even the right wing here don't mention abortion. Like, it's not an issue, whereas he's made some really weird statements. But either way, regardless of all of that, it's a tight race between him and Andy Burnham. Burnham looks like he probably will win, but it's really not a done thing at all. It's not a conclusive thing at this stage.
Do you think if he does win, that Labour? Last question on this: do you think if he does win, that Labour will be in a better position with him as a possible man at the helm?
Undoubtedly. I mean, to be honest with you, if they had the Ebola virus take over from Keir Starmer, he would probably have better ratings. But Burnham is undoubtedly a much more popular candidate than Keir Starmer. So just on that basis alone, they'll be in a better position. I have had my very, very significant doubts with Burnham's campaign because he has his main opponent is on the right. He has had to run a more right-wing campaign than I think he would initially have wanted to do, and I think he intends to govern more to the left of where he's positioned himself during this election. But either way, he has been sort of continuity, which is to ignore the point, because Keir Starmer isn't just unpopular because he's Keir Starmer. He's unpopular because he hasn't produced policies that the Labour voting public want. And he's sort of positioned himself as a kind of continuity, almost Starmerite, but just not Starmer, which, if he governs in that way, will ultimately lead to the same unpopularity. So it sort of depends whether he's hiding his power level or telling the truth. But I ultimately don't think he will be able to... Look, he'll be able to drag it back a bit, I think, to the point where the Labour Party, instead of being wiped out literally as a historical force... If Keir Starmer fights the next general election for the Labour Party, they're dead. Literally, the seats they were losing in my own city of Birmingham, they have controlled the city council here for the better part of the last century, and they got virtually wiped out here. If they lose in places like Birmingham and in Manchester and Wigan,
really
and places
high stakes
like
politics now. You know, conservatives suffer a generational loss only to be followed by the Labour Party, which won that generational victory, possibly no longer existing in the way that you're phrasing it.
Yeah, basically, yeah. And this is the reason that I sort of draw the conclusion between them and the major political parties in France and lesser in Germany, I suppose. But like, if you look at the old traditional conservative and socialist parties in France, they're nowhere now. They're basically obliterated. And that essentially, we're following that same pattern here in the UK. Those parties have abandoned their voting bases and so have left a massive political vacuum to be filled by somebody, either the Front National or the UKIP or Brexit party or Reform or whoever, Restore even, maybe, who knows. So yeah, that's essentially where you end up. Whereas I think under Burnham, I think they would avoid that fate. I think they would be an ongoing, operating political concern going forward in a way that they wouldn't be under Starmer, but I don't think they have any chance of winning the next general election regardless.
I wanted to talk to you about two more things. Number one,
yes.
Mélenchon and the Green Party. One thing that Mélenchon is very bad on is Ukraine and Russia. He just has a really bad record on what France should be doing with its relationship with the Russians. As for the Green Party, it depends on the MP. Some MPs are very good on Ukraine. I have gotten real concern from British journalists here in Kiev about Zach Polanski, about exactly what his position is on the war. There's a few things, and I literally DM'd them that said, hey, what's the things that worry you, right? Now, the first thing, this is unrelated, but this is something that actually wins me over, but it did not win them over. Polanski stands by breast enlargement hypnosis claim. Now, can you help explain to me what exactly Polanski's breast enlargement hypnosis even is? For those of you who don't know, this is the leader of the Green Party, who at one point believed that he had the ability to use hypnosis as part of as just one part of a operation to enlarge women's breasts. And he sold those for as a job.
Yes and no. It's a bit of a non-story, really, but they're kind of going with it. Before he became a politician, he was a hypnotherapist. And he was involved in what was essentially a kind of media sting operation. It was a writer for the Sun newspaper, which is a joke Murdoch press thing. The whole point of this breast enlargement thing was not to actually physically grow the size of a person's breasts. It was essentially to get a person to imagine that their breasts were larger and therefore have less of a psychological concern about the size of their breasts, because it was a thing that was affecting their mental health. Now, he did make claims about physical enlargement, which obviously were wrong and shouldn't have said.
So he did say at one point that his hypnosis can actually make a woman's breasts actually bigger, not just bigger in their head.
Yeah, he did say it once, and it was reported in the media. Again, it wasn't really a story until he became a political leader. But he's since retracted that and apologised, right? Which, okay, fair enough, fine, whatever.
So he won't make my tits bigger.
No, unfortunately not. Although it has become a meme now. If anyone wants to, vote for Hypno Boob T-shirts, I would happily purchase one. It's essentially just a political meme, though, and it gives you some indication of, in the same way that the people who attack Mamdani always have to bring up some weird bullshit. Like, if the worst dirt you have on a guy is he once made a silly claim about growing tits, rather than like lying in order to support genocide or being a warmonger. Like, yeah, okay, I'll take the hypnoboob guy. Thanks, actually. Yeah, that's fine. Like, the attack doesn't really hold weight when we exist in the land of Keir Starmer, whose lies about everything are way worse and way more consequential. Like, no one cares about hypnoboob.
For a moment, I thought, because this is the positive thing that I wanted to talk about. This is the good thing in my mind. Because this is awesome. I want more elected officials that have like wacky beliefs like this. Because this hurts nobody. It's silly, but it also hurts nobody. So I was gonna get disappointed because the way you were talking was almost like, oh no, he didn't believe that hypnosis could enlarge the boobs, and then you brought me back in at the end, and you got my endorsement.
Well, he doesn't really believe that, and he never did believe that. He just said it. Yeah, he basically fucking lied, let's be honest. That's what happened. He lied.
So it was a breast enlargement scam.
Well, not really, because he never made any money from it, and he never sold that as a thing.
It was not profitable.
He just said
he didn't make money from it.
He just said to one journalist once that was a thing, and that was it.
Wait, he was doing this for free?
No. Right. He was never at any point selling the idea that he could actually make people's tits bigger. As a hypnotherapist, it was about trying to get people to not have a problem with the size of their tits. Right? Because that can be psychologically difficult for women who have smaller breasts, or have breasts that are too large, actually can be a thing as well. But the point was to try and help them to, like, get over that thing. And he said a stupid thing once to a journalist, which, and then but subsequently retracted and apologized for it. So, like, who cares? Like, it genuinely doesn't matter. It's such a non-story. Yeah.
For a second, I thought you was doing it for. You were just like, okay, I'm the hypnosis guy. Take off your shirt. This is for free. This is charity.
No. When I say he never made money out of it, he never sold it. At no point did he ever go to a client and say, I can actually make
your boobs bigger.
No, never happened, right? I said it to a journalist once, and it was a stupid thing to have said, especially to a journalist who writes in a paper, because they might print that, you dopey bastard. But other than that, it's basically a non-story. And again, it doesn't matter, because this story blew up again during not the current by-election, but there was a previous by-election in Manchester, in order to try and smear the Green Party. And it didn't work, because the Green Party won that election way more comfortably than even the polling suggested they were going to. So this attack line, this is why they've essentially dropped this attack line, is it doesn't work. The people who are prepared to vote Green don't give a fuck about some dumb story from 10 years ago, whatever it was. Like, no one cares. It's such a non-story. No one changed their vote on that basis. They're going to have to dig up some actual dirt on the guy if you want to try and smear him, because this isn't working,
So let's talk about some things that are actually policy related, or statements that he said. Like, the things that actually make me feel a little like exactly where is this guy going to come from if he gets in there? So there's three main things. Number one, he has this stance about reforming NATO. I don't know if you've ever heard him talk about that. Have you heard that before?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he said that he wants to reform NATO. He remains committed to
Britain. Sharing screen so people could you could watch it if you want to. But I just want to play it for people so people can see it.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah,
sure. I'm sharing screen, so if you want to see what I'm looking at.
Yeah. It's on my screen, yeah, I've got it.
Comes more scrutiny, and questions have been asked about where you actually stand on NATO and Ukraine. Now, if you were to abolish NATO as you wish, how would that help Ukraine?
Well, first of all, let's start with what the actual policy is. So the policy is to reform NATO from within, and what I'm arguing for, and by the way...
That's not what you think.
It is what I think. General Richard Sheriff was on TV this week, or has been reporting, that he thinks we need a gap analysis of what is happening around the world world in terms of weapons that we need to invest in and defence. What I'm arguing for is an alternative alliance with countries based in Europe. It's almost like you need to create a union of European countries, plus Brazil and Mexico and global south countries that recognise we cannot rely on Donald Trump. He is not a reliable ally. He is unpredictable.
Sorry, can I just be clear then? So your idea of reforming NATO from within is abolishing it and replacing it with something else?
Well, first of all, let's talk about if it's possible to reform NATO from within. I don't think it's possible because the United States, 86% of our arms imports come from the United States.
You just said your policy was to reform NATO from within. Now you're saying you don't think it is possible to do it. Which is it?
I think we can do more than one thing at once. So you can have step 1 and then step 2 and step 3. So let me outline that for you. Step 1, which is what has been trying to happen and clearly is not working, is to work with the United States. But we have a dangerous, unpredictable man who considers Vladimir Putin his friend, but brings Zelensky into the White House and shames him and disgraces him in front of the world. So whilst a few years ago we voted to reform NATO from within, what I'm saying is it's time to look at step 2. Step 2 is to work with our European neighbours to build greater alliances alongside security and defence, alongside those countries, plus Brazil and Mexico, and countries in the global south, to look at how we stop American imperialism and also conversations about China, and indeed Russia too. And in our own country, step 3 is to look at our own economic sovereignty.
So when I listen to this, this sounds like very well intentioned. Like I do want there to be confrontations for, like, if America says we're going to take Greenland, there should be counteraction so that America knows that they can't just do that. That Americans even would think that if we did that, then I could get my son killed, like getting shot by some Greenlander. No Greenlander never did anything wrong to me. Why would I want that type of counteraction. And so I'm not against that in principle. But America, if they're trapped in the NATO alliance, that's a good thing. If they're trapped inside a commitment to defend the transatlantic alliance, that is a positive thing. And I do worry if completely kicking out the United States and Europe going about it on its own, especially when Europe doesn't have, like, to be blunt, like the ammunition to do that. At this point, like, I don't know. This feels very aspirational. Do you think this is him basically like daydreaming about like aspirational objectives? Do you think this is something he would actually try to actuate if he became prime minister? Because the Green Party is rising.
Yeah, well, the Green Party is undoubtedly rising. I think his chances of becoming prime minister are like vanishingly small. You've got to bear in mind the Green Party had one member of parliament for 15 years or whatever, and have now in the most recent election now got 4. So like that's out of 650. So like they're not a major political force in terms of parliamentary representation, but they're now like in the top 4 for overall vote percentage, and will undoubtedly, I think, gain dozens of seats at the next general election. So they'll become a force, but his chance of becoming prime minister are virtually nil, I would say. So I don't think you need to worry about it directly in terms of the policy. But the thing is, it's obviously how it affects other political parties, because as we talked about with Restore affecting Reform, because they have a right-wing threat to them, the Labour Party have to react to the Green Party because they have a threat from their left, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's how it affects the Labour Party, or how it affects, well, every other party, because the dynamic changes. Is the old adage about if you're explaining, you're losing, I think comes into this here, because the policy of we need to reform NATO, but NATO can't be reformed is a little bit ridiculous, and people will see through that. It's a little bit convoluted and silly to have to explain various steps you're going to take. Either you think NATO is viable in a reformed way, or it isn't. And I will push back on you slightly when you say that defending the transatlantic alliance is in of itself a good thing, because I don't think America does do that. Now, it's not just that Trump definitely doesn't do that, because of course, like you say, he's threatened to invade Greenland, and Denmark is literally a part of NATO. So not only is he not defending NATO, he's actively attacking NATO allies, which ironically could have triggered Article 5 of NATO, which would force America to declare war on itself for having attacked a NATO country, which is a delicious piece of irony, but that's never going to happen. In fact, the only time it ever has been instituted was on 9/11, where America wasn't attacked by a nation state at all. So if anything goes to show you that NATO is there to protect America and not Europe, I think it would be that. But regardless, the United States, even under previous administrations, has not really been defending Europe. It's been defending its own imperialism. Like Britain, for instance, like we aren't really a sovereign nation because overwhelmingly the British public are against America's involvement in Iran, and yet the British government had to cede to American pressure and allow bombs to be placed on planes on British air bases. So literally in Gloucestershire, the Americans essentially rent an air base from us, and they've been loading bunker buster bombs to be used against the Iranian people in Britain. That's something the British public doesn't want. We are beholden to the American government. The American government isn't protecting us. It's subjecting us, if nothing else. So for me, I think having a more Europe-aligned defense strategy, if for nothing else, is to accept the reality that America isn't there to protect us, and America wouldn't come to our defense if we were attacked. Like, it's what NATO has become is a safety blanket for European leaders to pretend to their nations is going to protect us, and it isn't. And accepting that reality seems like a perfectly reasonable thing to want to do. But that's a more difficult discussion than I think Zach Polanski is willing to have. I think what he's trying to do is halfway house it in order to say to the left, look, NATO's bad, Donald Trump is bad, but also to say, don't worry, we're not actually going to leave NATO to the more kind of liberal centrist type people that he needs to win over as well. So I think that's ultimately where he's at. But ultimately, he won't become Prime Minister, and the Labour Party are so committed to NATO that it fundamentally doesn't make much difference in the short term anyway.
I will say the U.S. does use Europe for transportation of munitions, for housing Africa Command, for housing American bases, for intelligence gathering, signal stuff, all sorts of stuff. That's absolutely true. And the idea that when America was attacked, America called upon its European allies to go die in Afghanistan and such, just like our soldiers did. So that's absolutely true. But I do think that it is more transactional than you're giving it credit for. Of course, NATO was primarily the main actor in the Yugoslav intervention and like stopping the continuation of the Bosnian genocide as Serb forces were engaging in like horrific slaughter. They were the ones that actuated the UN mission. Now there's a question about if there was any other option for who else could have actuated that mission, but ultimately NATO was the force that did that. But the bigger thing, of course, is Russia. You know, NATO was created to keep the Germans in and to keep the Russians out. And in that goal, that very narrow goal, it has been successful. And that's part of the reason why the Russians hate NATO expansion so much, and they complain about it so much, and John Mearsheimer whines about it so much, because that's why Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania wasn't invaded, but Ukraine was. And I think that should be the main thing about NATO that we should really care about is its deterrence quality, not whether or not the United States says, comes to the United Kingdom's aid when the Falklands is invaded, which, is unprincipled on the United States part, but also is still, it doesn't diminish the deterrence value across the transatlantic.
Yeah, there's no doubt that there are some positives to be pointed to, like you say, with Serbia or with the deterrence to the Baltic nations. I think there's no doubt about the deterrence to the invasion of the Baltic nations. But I think that can be garnered by any other number of different alliances. And NATO is so obviously the America's kind of vehicle for its imperialism that I don't think that it can be reformed. I think Zach Polanski is correct about that. I think you would have to have some other organization, which America could join, but America would have to join on the basis of vaguely accepting that other people's opinions matter, rather than it being America just dictating to European nations. And especially, like, the really annoying thing as a European taxpayer that Donald Trump does is this thing about, well, you need to pay your way, you need to have X percentage of your GDP spent on defense. Like, motherfucker, you're the one that wants to call the tune. You have to pay the piper. If you want to be the imperial overlord, you have to pay for that shit. Like, if we're just going to be left to our own devices and have to fund it all ourselves, well, you can get your fucking listening stations out of my nation that you use to spy on my fucking citizens. That's the thing that's really galling.
I do want to see your search history. I am still interested in looking as the government allows American to do. I think you broke up. Hello? Hello? Oh. Is it a power outage on my side, or... I don't think so. Power's still on. Internet looks good on my side. Yeah, I think it's on his side. Man, I wanted to get into the, dang. We're near the end of our topic, too. A message. Can't hear ya. How you doing, chat? MI5 or MI6 got him. Kevin Logan is the biggest threat to British national security that exists.
Am I back?
Oh, got you. We were just saying that you're a huge threat to British national security.
Well, undoubtedly so, yeah, but they can't kick me out. I've got a passport and everything.
I do want to say I do agree to like how much America runs roughshod and how, you know, but I think this is the fault of two things. Number one, Europeans refuse to make the investments necessary so that they can run roughshod if they want to. Whether like personal defense investments, or when they do make defense investments, they make defense investments in a politically motivated way, not in a European defense-centered way, i.e., I'm going to spend a lot more money to make these artillery shells in my district, even though it's going to mean a lot more red tape, less time to produce them, less shells ultimately made, and it's going to be a lot more expensive than making them in, say, I don't know, Albania or somewhere where it's going to be a lot cheaper. You're going to be able to run them more often. And you're going to be able to get more like product for the amount of money you're investing, while still allowing you to have things like health care, which as an American would be really nice if we had things like that. And so Europe has not been great on that, but on the bigger side, Europeans don't take stands across against the United States. When the Danes stood up to the United States on Greenland, the United States backed down. When the Spanish said to Trump, "You're not going to be able to base your planes here," the United States backed down. When the French said, "We're not going to invade Iraq with you," the United States backed down. Now, in all of these instances, you could make arguments that, well, the United States didn't need Spain when it comes to its operations in the Middle East. The United States didn't need France when it comes to the invasion of Iraq, or the United States didn't need X, Y, and Z, but it would have helped. And it shows that when they push back, you know, in many instances, the United States might have to kick rocks. And if the question is between keeping your constituents happy versus keeping the United States happy, ultimately national leaders should choose the former. And the ones that do tend to be the ones that stick around. And I think that if the Europeans engage with that philosophy more, it will create both a better Europe and a better United States, because we'll spend less time thinking of like Hoi 4 paradox game, like redrawing of the map to make Pax Americana, and we'll think a lot more about our shared security interests.
Well, you make a very good point there, but I think it goes against the general thesis you were pushing forward previously. I think it is absolutely true that the European leaders have been far too cocked to America, but surely Zach Polanski making these kind of anti-NATO points is exactly the opposite opinion, or the opposite point you were making about the necessity of NATO. That if a person gains popularity by looking after their own constituents rather than looking after America, might be one of the reasons that the Green Party have done relatively well, because they're actually speaking to the priorities of the British people, and that NATO can only exist with Europe cocked.
I don't know if NATO can only exist with Europe cocked. Originally, NATO could only exist with Germany cocked, in my opinion.
That is undoubtedly true, yes.
The historic argument by the French before World War II was, at least the French socialist appeaser section of the French. I mean, it wasn't just them that was appeasers, but "Why die for Danzig" was the famous quote. But during the Cold War, it was, "We'll trade New York for Paris. Will America trade New York for Paris? Will America trade Boston for London? Like, will they engage in atomic war? Berlin for Baltimore," you know, something along those lines. And through the Cold War, that test did seem to at least caused the Russians enough concern that they never seized Berlin. And so I do think that that fundamental underlying collective defense built up over 80 years, like that is invested value that is useful. And so if you wanted to talk about all the other functions of NATO, or even doing actual reforms within NATO, but to see the ease at which he says reform NATO, but not really, like, to me, it shows a lack of acceptance of NATO's basic use. Not the idea that NATO should do this, NATO should do that, NATO should be subservient to the United States, but the idea that if Europe is not collectively defending itself, especially with like strong allies, then war on the European continent becomes much more likely. Wars like the war in Ukraine will become more likely in the future. It'll just be other countries besides just Ukraine. Maybe it'll be Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, maybe Romania, as Transnistria, Moldova, of course, is an ongoing issue, and there is desire for Transnistria and Moldova to rejoin with Romania. What will Russia do in a situation like that when their military bases are threatened over like the concerns of like local sovereignty? Like these are questions where if NATO's not there, there has to be something there that stops the Russians from invading. And it's something that has to be NATO-like, at least when it comes to that basic function.
Yeah. It's an interesting comparison, Berlin for Baltimore, because if a nuclear bomb landed on Baltimore, would anyone be able to tell?
You know, I think a few people would be. I would be able to tell. I think I'd be able to tell. Thank you very much.
Okay, I just wanted to have a go at Maryland. Anyway, yes, I know that the point you're making is generally true. In order for any actually mutually defensive pact organization to exist that would be effective, they do have to have that deterrent threat. Like you say, I think the Baltic countries are a very good example of this. Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, previously part of the Russian Empire, which is, of course, Putin's ultimate goal, as he wants to kind of build the Soviet Union, but without communism, I suppose. Or you know, the Grand Imperial Russia of old, or whatever particular formation he has in his fucking
Russia
stupid...
too.
Cancer-addled mind. And of course that would involve the Baltic nations, which, interestingly, a little fact for you, only became a part of the Soviet Union because of a deal that Stalin did with Adolf Hitler. Literally a Nazi deal led to that becoming part of Russia, or part of the Soviet Union. Never mind. And the only reason they've not been invaded is because they're part of NATO. Realistically, they couldn't stop Russia because they're tiny nations.
At least not on their own.
Exactly, yeah. Well, even collectively, all three of them together couldn't really do a great deal because they don't amount to that many millions of people. It's just it's a basic numbers game. And of course, the fact that Russia is a nuclear-armed nation and has a Baltic fleet in a way that the Baltic countries do not, it would be impossible for them to defend themselves. But NATO, the fact that they're NATO, and you don't want to get nuclear bombs and all the rest of it. I don't even know. Vilnius for Valparaiso or something would be the equivalent. I don't know. Riga for Rhode Island.
Riga for Rhode Island is good. I like that.
Yeah, especially because Riga's bigger, probably, geographically speaking. Anyway, the reason that those countries have not been invaded is because of NATO. And so any defensive pact, be a European-based one or a reformed NATO or some other NATO-like organisation, would have to have that same heft behind it in order to deter not either Vladimir Putin, because he's going to be gone at some point in the relatively near future, because he's old and ill. Yeah, well, indeed so, sir. I've never supported cancer more than the cancer that is currently eating away at his innards. Melanoma has a chance to do the funniest thing. So at some point he will be gone, but he'll be probably replaced with some other fucking oligarch piece of shit who might not be as mental,
Russian
but
Bernie Sanders, what do you mean, is going to come out of the woodwork?
Well, the same political sort of dynamic that led to his rise still remains, and so garbage in, garbage out type thing. Some other dickhead is going to step into his place, whether it be Medvedev or whoever. Someone will be ensconced, and the same sort of process could potentially continue. And either way, there is going to be a continued geostrategic push between various countries in various parts of the world. The same would apply with, say, China and Taiwan or whatever. You're gonna have these geopolitical flashpoints, and NATO or some NATO replacement would need to have the same heft in order to stave off that kind of political or geostrategic threat. So I agree with you on that point, and in that respect, you're going to need America on the side, if nothing else. But what we can't, I think, continue to have is Europe being dictated to in the way that America seems intent on doing. And again, the thing is, Trump is bad not because of the things he does, so not just because of the things he says, because essentially he says the quiet part out loud. But Europe has always been aware that the quiet part was there, even if Joe Biden or Bill Clinton or Ronald Reagan weren't saying it, it was there. Donald Trump is annoying to a lot of liberal people because he says the rude thing, but the rude thing has been American fucking policy towards Europe for decades now, and it's very, very grating for the European electorate.
So one last thing I wanted to, I just want to get through these because it is getting late for you and it's getting late for me, and I'll make sure that we can both. I was
about to say it's later. It's later for you, yeah.
2 hours later, yeah. In fact,
yeah.
I wanted to read you a different quote by Zach. This is probably what I found most objectionable.
Okay.
This was made in April of this year, so like we're talking like not even 2 months ago. I'm looking at the date right now. I was asked over and over again who I thought was worse, Vladimir Putin or Donald Trump. My answer has always been, oh, wait a second. No, this is the previous statement. Here's the original statement. He made a follow-up statement after backlash. As horrendous as Putin is, I've never seen him threaten genocide. I've never seen him threaten to wipe out a civilization. Starmer's so-called special relationship is more of a danger than what Putin is doing in Ukraine. Essentially saying that Starmer's relationship with Donald Trump is more dangerous than what Putin is doing in Ukraine, as well as saying that Putin has never tried to wipe out a civilization. Obviously, Ukraine is a civilization. At least I go outside, I see stores, I see all the signs of civilized life. And he does bomb it quite a lot. He does try to wipe it off, like as a national entity off the face of the earth. That is trying to wipe out a civilization. Definitely when you speak about the destruction of culture and language and the Russification of the school program, the kidnapping of children. I mean, this is completely out of tune, no?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think this was a big misstep on his part. I don't know if he's clarified or apologized since.
He has. If you want, I can read that too.
Yeah, if you want to, yeah.
I was asked over and over again who I thought was worse, Vladimir Putin or Donald Trump. My answer has always been, I don't think it's helpful to compare oppression. Like he called it also just did the comparison, whatever. All oppression is oppression. I think my answer is even more nuanced. Now, though, as horrendous as Vladimir Putin is, and as despicable as his crimes are, I've never seen him threaten genocide. I've never seen him threaten to wipe out a civilization. I've never seen Keir Starmer claim we have a special relationship with Vladimir Putin, as we shouldn't, or that he's our ally. But we have with Donald Trump. Where is the moral consistency here with a man who is literally threatening genocide? What was Keir Starmer's reaction to that? On the day Trump threatened genocide, Keir Starmer tweeted or posted about Wireless Festival, a music festival in the UK. There was no condemnation whatsoever for Mr. Keir Starmer that I saw anyway about what he was threatening to do with Iran, nor Lebanon or Gaza. I think it's despicable, and so I think at this point it's not that Donald Trump is more of a danger than Vladimir Putin, but I think Keir Starmer's commitments to a so-called special relationship with Donald Trump is more of a danger to the British people than what Vladimir Putin is doing in Ukraine, which also, by the way, is vile and needs to be stopped. But if we want to get into comparisons, I'm actually more concerned at this point about Keir Starmer's relationship with Donald Trump.
Yeah, okay, so that's a clarification of sorts, although I still think he's wrong on a number of points. As you point out, Ukraine very much a civilization, rather famously has a very advanced amount of organized agriculture, for instance, one of the staple parts of static civilized entities like cities and towns and villages and such. It's ridiculous that he would say that. I think he's taking kind of left populism a little bit too literally, or a little bit too like he's learning somehow some of the wrong lessons of how the right has done populism and applying it to a left-wing analysis. And he's learning as he goes, because he's a relatively new politician, you got to bear in mind. He's not actually technically even a member of the British Parliament at this point, although I'm sure he will be after the next election. But the point is, I think he's made a misstep in this particular regard. Although I think the position he's taking there about moral clarity and stuff is absolutely true. If you look at the way in which British and American politicians have quite rightly condemned the genocide that takes place in eastern Ukraine, but are not doing so with the genocide taking place in Gaza. In fact, Starmer has been actively supportive of and doing fucking drone flights on behalf of Israel from RAF Akrotiri. This is, there's no moral clarity or position there whatsoever. In terms of who is more destabilizing for the world, I would argue Donald Trump is more destabilizing, especially post-Iran, although to be fair, those statements that Zach Polanski made were pre the Iran war, but I think that it bears fruit, I suppose, his statement. I think undoubtedly Trump is more destabilizing and is a bigger threat more broadly, in the same way that I think probably most American politicians have the potential to be that kind of destabilizing force because of the power they have. Most of them use it with some level of competence, I suppose, in a way that Trump does not. Trump has essentially been debated into doing a war in Iran by Benjamin Netanyahu, which is pretty bad. You know?
I can understand saying that Donald Trump is a bigger threat to global stability due to his general inability to make a decision and stay committed to it, his general his just nature of making off the cuff decisions, all these his just bad ethics. These are all things that I could agree to. But the United States engages in spying operations in the United Kingdom. I don't know about the United States engaging in sabotage operations. I don't know about the United States hiring teenagers to go burn down factories or go burn down storage warehouses or which is something that the Russian government actively does. Not to mention the Russians are damaging undersea cables, which they're not that far from British water.
But
I understand. What my point isn't that America doesn't. My finer point is, in an effort to avoid, because he actively says I don't want to do oppression Olympics, but then he kind of engages in it anyway when it comes to comparing the Palestinian and Ukrainian struggle. And then he does something like an Olympics of sorts of who's more dangerous, Putin or Trump, when the types of threats that they pose are so vastly different that it's hard to compare.
To be fair, he was directly asked that. So the fact that he answered a question is refreshing for a British politician, rather than dancing around the issue. He actually answered directly a question he was posed. So I think he didn't raise that apropos of nothing.
There are
he was
some
asked
questions
about
that might be better to not answer. If somebody came up to me and was okay, so who's better to beat, the child or the elderly? Those are there's certain questions I don't know if
well,
I don't know.
A child, they can't fight back.
Well,
Easy.
See, but we're going from a different perspective. I was thinking better for humanity, not better for my swinging arm. I wasn't.
Well, no, I'm just thinking. No, I'm just thinking. How do I most easily take the dub? Little child, what's he gonna do? I'll knock him the fuck out. Easy.
I guess so. That depends on the definition of child. If it's a 16-year-old who's doing high school football versus a 97-year-old Revolutionary War vet,
Okay, in that situation, I'll take the older one. And I'll just wait for winter. I'll just wait for winter.
And they turn into dust, essentially.
Yeah, I'll just wait for winter to take care of him.
A strong gust of wind.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a cold snap, he's gone. Easy. Wouldn't have to get out of my chair. Anyway, nonsense, right. I agree with the point you're making. I think a studious sidestepping of a certain question would probably be more politically efficacious. But in terms of honesty, he's at least given his opinion, even if one disagrees with it.
Do you think it kind of shows... What was the point I was going to make broadly?
Oh,
sorry, I don't want to interrupt your more broad point.
No, go on.
Do you think it kind of shows the depths of at least left activist knowledge when it comes to Ukraine? That's so quickly people can say, if this, something I see all the time online, and it's not just from him. I think his name's Owen Jones, I believe, if you're familiar with him. I see him sometimes say something along the lines of, what, if the Russians did this, and then he immediately describes something that the Russians have, like, I've seen the Russians do, and it's, and I see that type of, where people just, like, they're horrified by what's going on in Gaza, and that's their focus. And so when they go and they try to explain that horror, they try to use other conflicts or other suffering or the actions of other states to try to prop it up. I mean, we all do that to some extent. For example, when I compared what happened in Kherson to the snipers of Sarajevo. But it's really bad when you do it with, like, no knowledge and say things like that. I guess that's more my problem, because I don't know if it's just the spaces that he's coming from. I don't know if it's a fault of those who have failed to get the right information to him. I don't know if it's his advisors. I don't know.
I don't necessarily think he, in terms of Zach Polanski, I don't think his foreign policy chops are particularly great. I will say that that's certainly something he needs to get better at. I think get a more get a team around him of advisors that do understand things a bit better. In terms of, I mean, I don't know the exact quote you're mentioning from Owen Jones, but what I will say, I think, is. And I've made the comparison between Russia and Palestine, Ukraine and Palestine, not because of wanting to do with Pression Olympics, but specifically to point out the hypocrisy of Western politicians. Western politicians are, quite rightly, would come forward and describe actions that Russia take, like the day after they've taken them, as war crimes or as genocidal or as murderous and vile and illegal under international law, etc., etc. But when the Israeli government do demonstrably worse things in many cases, they're obfuscatory and say, well, we'll wait and see, the International Criminal Court will have to investigate and blah, blah, blah. They don't wait for that investigation when it comes to Russia. And that, pointing out that hypocrisy, I think, is a perfectly worthwhile thing to do, because you're not saying that one set of lives is worth more than any other, or that one situation is necessarily worse than any other. It's to point out the politically interesting difference between the way in which political actors operate in regards to those two situations, which shows their hypocrisy and the fact that they're cooked in one situation and not in the other.
I think that's fair, and I've seen Mehdi Hassan do something closer to that, where he's like, immediately after this war crime you said X, but after this war crime you said, so that I see. But that's because you're, like, referencing direct war crimes. You're referencing, why do you quote here when you didn't quote here? So you have to have some knowledge about said war crimes in order to call that out. Where I see, like, this idea of, like, you didn't try to wipe out a civilization, that just comes from, like, a lack of knowledge. So I think maybe it would be a more astute comment if he had the grounding of knowing what was happening in Ukraine to be able to make the comment and be able to compare, for example, Starmer's statement about a bombing in Ukraine to a bombing in Gaza or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think you're right there. What he could have done is both answered the question and sidestepped it by saying, if he genuinely believes that Trump is worse, just say that you believe that Trump is worse. And then you don't have to say directly Putin hasn't threatened to do X, Y, or Z, or that Putin has done X, Y, and Z. You can literally just state why you think Trump is bad. And you don't have to say that Putin hasn't done those things when you don't necessarily know one way or the other, because, again, his policy chops in foreign policy aren't that great. He doesn't really understand these things with the level that you would ideally hope he would. And, again, he's not going to be prime minister, so you don't really need to worry about it in a direct sense. But what he could just do is then outline the ways in which Trump is bad. And there you don't leave yourself open to the attack, or not even the attack, but you don't open yourselves up to the possibility of giving intellectual succor to bad actors like Putin and his sort of minions in the West.
That's true. Benjamin, we're going to get to the topic I know you're interested in next segment, but I want to thank you for the $25. And then lastly, wrap this up with, did you see what Zach Polanski said about atomic weapons in the Russians?
No. What did he say about that?
He said, this was back in, I believe this was like near the end of last year, 2025.
Okay.
That he would try to persuade Vladimir Putin to give up his nuclear weapons. Now, I think we both probably know where this is coming from. It's a nuclear non-proliferation argument that, we don't want anyone to have these types of weapons. Someone could talk about, whether or not they prevent wider, bloodier wars if you had like a small group of, but that's a totally different discussion. From that angle, even from the most like sympathetic angle I can look at this from, where I'm agreeing with them on so many different levels, does it not come off as naive to talk about like convincing Putin to get, like, this is somebody under no circumstance, him or his clique or those who will come after him if they have anything to do with him, are going to give up what is one of the few things that allows the Russians to equalize with the Chinese and the United States when they are falling behind on technology, on the economy, on demographics, on everything, on literally everything, to the point where they cannot conduct this war even in their own backyard, and they're going to give up atomic weapons. It just, even if it comes from a good place, it just, I'm more worried about, like, how do you talk to the British public about foreign policy when you don't have that experience, put out statements like this, and not just be looked at as naive?
Yeah, that was naive of him to say. I think you can make a perfectly sensible argument in favour of international arms reduction treaties or something like that, doing kind of reviving the kind of SALT protocols and things like that, and trying to reduce nuclear stockpiles. I think that's a perfectly reasonable and actionable policy that he could look into. But yeah, just saying I want to try and persuade Vladimir Putin, that's obviously not going to happen, and he's fantastically naive. Again, I think in terms of foreign policy, he needs to get better, and in the short term, sort of stop talking about it so much, because you say things that are, even if they're, like you say, well-intentioned, can be used as weapons against you. So maybe sort of chill out on that sort of topic for a while. He's very good on doing like economic populism. Stick to that. That's a winning strategy for you. Get better advisors first and foremost around you on this basis. And again, you've got to bear in mind the Green Party was a minor party 12 months ago. It did not have that many members. It's now the second largest membership of any political party in the UK, and is a growing force in terms of electoral politics as well. And so having good, seasoned advisors... Well, yeah, exactly. Well, not just that, though, but of course, people who are experts in a field aren't necessarily going to waste their time advising tiny minor parties, whereas now they're a larger political party. I think people who are experts in these fields, who are well versed in these topics, are more likely to come on board with your political project and advise you.
Are you offering me a job?
Well, if you want me to get you in touch with Zach Blansky, literally my co-host, No Justice MTG, was interviewed on his podcast. So we've got connections. I can get you in touch if you need to.
Well, look at that.
But either way, he needs to get better advisors around him and more experienced advisors, both in terms of the actual policy, but also in terms of communication as well, because his communication in economics is very good. His communication in other areas is not so great. And so he needs to be able to, advance his political messaging on a number of areas, and until he does that, it's best to try and avoid some of these pitfalls if you can. By the way, you can stick to stuff like attacking Donald Trump, because that's a winner, and there is plenty to attack there, whereas doing kind of weird comparisons with Putin or Ukraine is probably best avoided,
That's true. I want to ask you one last thing before I let you go, because I was wondering this, would you describe yourself as an anarchist?
No, I wouldn't. I mean, I have sympathies in anarchist directions, because I do despise the nation state as a concept. I think nations exist and countries exist, and that's absolutely fine, and has always been the case. Civilization naturally leads to coalitions of different peoples in nations, but nation states with absolute defined borders I don't particularly like. The problem I have, of course, is the idea that one can get rid of a state completely, I think is impossible. At best, I might describe myself as a minarchist, i.e. the idea of having a relatively small guiding state that allows people the autonomy to decide within their own communities seems perfectly possible, albeit not necessarily very plausible in the future. It's not I'm a socialist who doesn't believe that we can achieve socialism in my lifetime, which is pessimistic but true. That's just absolutely fucking true. And I think the same is true with any kind of reform of the nation state in this regard as well. But no, in terms of anarchism, I don't see it as actionable, really.
Well, I wanted to ask you then, as somebody on the left, or once minimal government influence on people's lives, leave people alone. Once again, look, fuck off left. I think it was a correct identification.
Yes. Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you about the draft, because while people won't want to engage with me on this directly, sometimes I'll see some like reflection about, for example, the Ukrainians' draft system. And I'm critical of the Tetsika and how they believe and how they behave. They tried to pick me up. They tried to draft me one time. You know, there's tons of videos, there's tons of commentary that I could make about this. But ultimately, when a nation state that represents an ethnic identity is in a fight for survival against another nation state that wants to erase that ethnic identity through like aggressive programs, violent programs, torture. And we've seen the brutal reality of that. We've seen the human safari, that sometimes the state basically saying your social contract has to be fulfilled on both ends, where you have to defend the state in wars of survival, not wars of conquest, not wars of domino theory, not wars of like, halfway across the globe, but wars of survival in your own backyard. And I think the Ukrainians are in that situation. But then again, I've interviewed draft dodgers. I've interviewed people who have fled abusive military situations. And when I listen to their testimony, it's very hard for me to blame them for the decisions that they made because of, their dodging for the 155. And I reported on those stories like a year before the scandals in these military units like got out there. But when I look across it all, I understand that like if you want a community to survive, you have to get some barrier between you and the men, women, and children that make up society if you want that society to survive. And it's put me in this very difficult position where I'm generally, I would say, libertarian leaning when it comes to government and management of people's lives, and like how much the government should be in your bedroom, how much the government should be telling you what jobs to do, XYZ. But when it comes to national survival, it's like an all hands on deck situation. Like if this was the Civil War, I probably would have put down the Baltimore draft riots if necessary.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that point, I think. And I've taken some heat from people on the left for my support of the necessity of draft. Now, it does have to be done in a more equal way than I think it's ever been done, especially as you mentioned the American Civil War there, where of course you had commutation fees, which meant if you were rich, you could just pay your way out of the draft. That isn't tolerable. If it's going to be done, it has to be done fairly across all of society. But if it is done in that way, I think there are situations where, like you say, it's a matter of survival, because the Russian government were not going in there to take over and keep Ukrainian society as it was, but just under Russian auspices, which would be bad enough in of itself, but they weren't going to do that. They were going to try and erase Ukrainianness. And of course, in the way that the Soviet Union did with various other ethnic groups over the course of time, in terms of displacements and all sorts. And of course, Britain has done this in terms of genocide. Like lots of countries, imperialism in general is one to erase difference because it doesn't suit the imperial core. And so when you're in that situation, when you're in a situation of war and survival war, like you say, it's not about doing aggressive warfare. Like I disagree with drafting people to send them to like Iraq or something like that, or indeed Vietnam, as the case happened. But Ukraine, there is such a people as the Ukrainian people. There obviously are differences and all kinds of different things. It has a very interesting and rich history, but there is such a thing as the Ukrainian people. And when they were threatened with, to some extent, annihilation, I think it's fine for the government to step in and say that, like you say, a social contract works on both ends. The Ukrainian government, to some extent, serves you and you have to serve it. Now, that's the reason I dislike nation states, because it's a matter of serving like this idea of a state, rather than, from my perspective, it's serving people. I think you do it to defend people rather than to defend a state. Defending a state, I have no interest in ever fucking doing. Going to fight and die for the British state on the Somme was a disgrace. Fighting to try and defend yourself from being invaded by the Nazis, less so. And I think that's the way in which I would view the way in which Ukraine has done its thing. Again, the way in which it's been done has been pretty disgusting. We've seen, like, essentially what amount to kidnappings of people to be drafted into the Ukrainian war effort. Ultimately, that sort of had to be done on the basis that the Russian army were there. what do you do? Just capitulate and allow fascism to rule? I don't think that's a tolerable situation either. So it's a matter of a lesser evil. And it is an evil, be under no illusion. When you're drafted forcibly against your will to fight, that is an evil thing. It is far lesser than seeing that same person's family destroyed and that person's ethnic history erased on the basis of, in some cases, cowardice, some cases, perfectly legitimate anti-war sentiment, whatever. But ultimately, people do have to fight in order for freedom to be, to use the American phrase, the tree of liberty needs to be watered with the blood of patriots and tyrants. And this is absolutely true. There's no denying that the validity of that statement. And the tyrants were there, albeit they were often themselves drafted by a tyrant, but the army of a tyrant were there, and the patriots had to step forward and defend their people. Because, of course, we've seen, like you say, with Kherson and various other places, the ethnic genocide that's taken place, the stealing of children, the murdering of any dissidents, literally the erasure of the Ukrainian language. These are all genocidal things. And so you can't capitulate to that. And so something does have to be done. It's grim, and it is, like I say, it is evil, but it is a lesser evil.
The cost of freedom can be found buried in the ground. Thank you so much for coming on today, man. I really appreciate it. I know it's super late, and we would scheduling this and rescheduling this over and over and over again. But I always want to check up with you every 6 months to a year or so, because it's good to have your voice in my ear. It's good to get a on-the-ground perspective of what happens in the bubble that is British politics. And I always enjoyed you on Hippy Dippy, and since you're not on Hippy Dippy anymore, we don't have as many reasons to interact, so we got to create reasons. So this was a good reason.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, it's been a hot minute, but I've enjoyed it enormously. And we'll check back in another time. Stay safe, man. You're doing God's work.
Thank you very much. You have a good one, man. Talk to you later.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Oof, that was a good talk. Went a little longer than I expected, but that's good. That's good. I saw some people say, oh, rambling this, rambling that. You know what that means? You got too much content to deal with. You got too much commentary, too many opinions, too much news, too much content. The British can't talk politics. That is true. This is from Sunshine Ray in Twitch chat, first time chatter. It really doesn't matter what Russophobic thing you came up with today, Dylan. Russia will still win. Wow, that's very fascinating. I hadn't thought about that.